And I'm going to go ahead and record. Okay. All right. So we are recording and we are back on. I apologize again for what happened, but that's the way it goes. All right. So we're back into the PowerPoint presentation. So this is the very beginning of the PowerPoint. And like I was saying before we ended there, we are just going to start by talking about the 5 senses, because that is really what this program revolves around, is the age-related decline to the 5 senses. So the second thing that we'll talk about is, so we talk about the 5 senses, and then we'll go on to talk about how age-related sensory decline is normal. All people are going to experience age-related sensory decline to some extent. Some people might experience it just very little, to the extent that they may not even realize that they are experiencing decline, and other people will have quite obvious declines as well. So it's all normal. But it's all variable as to how much we actually experience. The other thing that at this point I like to do is ask people at what age the senses start to decline. And some of these questions are in the PowerPoint notes for you to help you sort of think what my brain was thinking as well. So asking the folks, you know, what age does sensory decline start to happen? And this often initiates conversation, or in a couple of classes I've been in, they've really been almost arguing about it, that, you know, oh, it doesn't start until you're 80, and other people are really firm that it starts when you're 40. So it can kind of be interesting. But generally, the sensory decline begins in your 50s, but it is different for every age, and you can put those up there one at a time. So hearing typically goes first, which isn't really a surprise to me, because oftentimes that's one of the things that we know that older adults face issues with their hearing. So another thing that you can do is talk to people and say, you know, which one do you think goes first, and that sort of thing. So hearing goes first in your mid-40s, followed by vision, touch, taste, and smell. But it's always important to note to people that, or to your participants, that taste and smell are very closely connected. So once one goes, the other one starts to go as well. We know that, especially if this happens in the reverse, for example, so when you lose your sense of smell, foods often become much harder to taste. So this is just an overall description of the senses and how they decline. And then we talk about all of these separately and give a little more information about each one. So with hearing decline, and this goes in the order in which they generally start to decline. So with hearing first, we know that 30 to 50% of all older adults experience hearing loss that affects their communication and relationships with others. So this isn't saying that 30 to 50% of people experience hearing loss, because actually the percentage who do is much higher.
Gotcha.
But this is saying that these older adults experience hearing loss to the point that it affects their communication and relationships with others. And one example that you can give with this is that, for example, if you're at family Thanksgiving dinner and you have a ton of people around the table.
I'm sorry, my webinar came back on. Hang on.
I'm hearing someone talking, so make sure that you're muted. So if we're thinking about the Thanksgiving table, when there's all these people around, and if you're experiencing hearing loss, it can be very difficult to engage in conversation and have a nice time, even because you're not hearing what's going on. It's very frustrating to you. You're experiencing all these emotions because you're frustrated that you can't hear, you're frustrated that you can't engage in conversation, and that sort of thing. And so it's that type of hearing loss that we're talking about here that's really affecting people's communication and their relationship with others. So it's really important just to note that hearing loss affects more things than what we oftentimes think about, especially when it comes to communication and relationships with others. Then the second sensory decline that we'll talk about is vision. So we know that adults are more likely to have vision loss and vision diseases and eye diseases than younger adults. Specifically, 2 to 3 times more likely to report vision loss than younger adults, which really isn't surprising. And then we get into talking about the leading eye diseases, and it's actually really surprising to me how many young adults have heard of these eye diseases because they know grandma who has cataracts and grandpa has macular degeneration. So it's really interesting that when I start mentioning these different eye diseases, they start to perk up and they really start connecting with it. And this is when, in my experience, I've seen that they really start to connect with this program because, like I said, they know grandma that has cataracts or grandpa that has macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy. So this is when it really starts to become personal for many of these participants, particularly our younger audiences. And I've experienced this with our high school groups and our college groups who have done this program when they really start to make this connection. So about the glasses, each set of glasses has something done to it that simulates the 4 eye diseases that we're talking about here. And when you get your kits, they're all marked. So on the left earpiece of the glasses, it's marked. So DR, for example, is diabetic retinopathy, MD for macular degeneration, G for glaucoma, and C for cataracts. So they're all marked on the side of the left side of the earpiece as to what the glass is simulating. Then also in your kit, you'll have a box, a plastic container that all of the glasses are stored in. And on the lid of that container is a key as to, for example, that C means cataracts and G means glaucoma. It's just another place for you to have that information in case you forget it, for example. So all of those glasses are in there. We do have the 4 glasses that simulate cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration, and diabetic retinopathy. And I will also go ahead and say now that when we have our participants get geared up, they will only have 1 glass that they can simulate at a time. So what I've done more recently is I found that our participants were switching individually or on their own. So for example, if they had a glaucoma glass, but they know, oh, my grandpa has diabetic retinopathy, I want to see what that looks like. I've heard similar situations like that many times. So what I started doing was when we switch activity stations, for example, I've encouraged them to switch glasses with somebody else so that they can experience the different eye diseases. So the next sensory decline is our sense of touch. And a really good example here is that when you lose your sense of touch, we all know when we stick our hand under a hot tap water, for example, we start to feel that pretty quickly. But as we age and as we lose that elasticity in our skin and our other cells start to die or not work as well in our fingertips, for example, you might not be able to feel that hot water as quickly, and their reaction time is slower because they've lost that sense of touch. So older adults can oftentimes be more at risk for burns and for not recognizing pain is another example. So we know in diabetic patients that sores on the hands and feet can become very common. And if you're also losing the sense of touch, what happens if you don't feel when you have a laceration or a cut or something on the bottom of your foot, and that ends up not healing very well and it gets infected and all these sorts of things, which are very much complicated, obviously, by the diabetes. But having this loss of sensory touch in your hands and even in your feet can really compound that. So we also say that this loss of touch can obviously affect the temperature and pain, but it can also be more difficult to feel vibration and pressure. The next sensory decline is our scent. And I always think it's really interesting. And I was sort of flabbergasted by this when I learned that we can recognize over 10,000 scents, which is really a lot. But as we get older, this ability obviously will decline with age, and this can become a safety issue. And I always enjoy asking here why. And most of them get it right away because they can't smell smoke or gas or those sorts of things. So our typical warning odors, such as smoke and natural gas and that sort of stuff that we would smell and be able to tell us that something's not right. But also they may not be able to smell personally offensive odors, such as body odors and that sort of thing. So this sense of smell can really affect a lot of different things. And then the last one is taste. And we can taste 4 different things as regular adults. So sweet, salty, bitter, and sour. And the ability to taste sweet and salty items are the first ones to be affected by sensory loss. So I often ask people at this point, why does that matter? How do you think that affects older adults? And this is a good point to talk about nutrition, because foods can start to taste differently as we age. So foods may not become as enjoyable as they once were. So maybe that salad just doesn't taste good anymore. So how can we encourage older adults to still eat healthfully, even when their food might taste different or it may not be as enjoyable as what it used to be? So that's a really good topic of conversation that I've had with several students. That's been really interesting, and they have a lot of good ideas. So then we go on to talk about functional declines here. And we know our sensory declines obviously affect our senses, and these functional declines affect our ability to function well. And the first one that we'll talk about is arthritis, because it is one of the most common functional declines in older adults, and a lot of people know what arthritis is and they've heard about it, so it can really resonate with them. And 50% of adults 65 plus report having a doctor diagnosed arthritis. And I always like to make the point here with our older audiences, in particular, that not everyone's going to report and not everyone's going to actually have a doctor diagnosed arthritis, because Grandma Susie, for example, she won't go to the doctor and tell him about her arthritis because she's strong and she can handle it and she doesn't need medicine or anything like that, which we see a lot with our older adults. They're trying to be strong and that sort of thing. So 50% have this doctor diagnosed arthritis, but think of what the percentage actually is of people who may potentially have arthritis but either aren't reporting it or aren't going to the doctor. Then we talk about mobility. Mobility is the most common disability among older Americans. And this is where we talk about why it's harder for grandma to get around the grocery store, or why it takes grandma so long to get out of the booth at Olive Garden. I'll never remember when I was in middle school or maybe high school, I was seeing a grandma with her young grandson. We were at Olive Garden and they were at the booth next to us, and he was just antsy and ready to get out of there and ready to go. And this poor woman was struggling to get out of the booth and was taking her a long while to get out of the booth because she was having these mobility challenges. And he was so frustrated with her and was so antsy for her, like, come on, grandma, come on, grandma. But it's important to understand and to provide these examples or ask how you've seen older adults have mobility challenges so that people can relate to this issue. The other thing is that 40% of older adults have experienced shortness of breath. So, and this is something that we'll simulate in the program, but it's really important to understand that having shortness of breath can really affect your quality of life, because you may not be as willing to get up and move, or maybe it's harder for you to get out and garden, or it's harder for you to go on a bike ride with your grandson or something like that. So it's shortness of breath. While it might seem like a minute thing to some people, it's really impactful on an older adult's daily life if they are experiencing the shortness of breath. And this is typically caused because we have decreased lung efficiency as we age. Just as a washer and dryer wears out, or your shoes wear out the more you use them, that's the same thing that happens with our body, including our organs, and our lungs don't work as efficiently as they did when we were younger. So that's sort of the opening introduction of the program, just giving people an overall sense of sensory decline, of functional declines. You can go as in-depth as you want, or you can breeze over it. It's really dependent on your audience, and you guys can make those decisions for yourselves. So this is the next portion where we start to have them get gray or get geared up. So before, they just have the material sitting out in front of them. They're listening to you so that they can sort of grasp what's going to be happening in the program and why we're doing this before they actually start to get geared up. Because once they're geared up, especially with our younger audiences, they get very distracted and they're all worried about their eyesight and all that sort of stuff. So we want to get that base information out before they get geared up and start getting all excited. So this is the order in which I suggest you have people get geared up. So the first thing they're going to do is put in their earplugs, then put on their sensory glasses, and then go on down the line. I will note that I have gotten several complaints from audience members that they don't want the earplugs in their ears first and that they can't hear the instructions. To which I respond that, well, that's sort of the point of the program, because if you have hearing loss, you're not going to be able to hear instructions as well either. So it's kind of funny, I've sort of spinned it around on them, that's the whole point of the program, is to experience this sensory decline, one of which is our ability to hear. So I do have them put the earplugs in first and then put the sensory glasses on. And once they have the sensory glasses, the experience is actually starting, because it's harder for them to hear the instructions. It's harder for them to see the cotton ball and to tape their fingers and put on the gloves. So we're really immersing them with two of the biggest sensory declines right off the bat. But if you want to be nice to your audience and let them put in their earplugs later, that's totally fine too. So then once they're geared up, then we go into the first group activity. And this one's a lot of fun. So in your kit, you will all have, I think I cut 35 pieces of yarn in there, so you have a few extra. But each person's going to get a piece of yarn, and you're going to give them this scenario that, great news, your grandson is here to visit, but uh-oh, he can't tie his shoe. And in the script, I think I say that the grandson's 3 years old or something like that. So, and I always say, so your 3-year-old grandson's here to visit and he can't tie his shoe, but how many 3-year-olds do you know that sit still when you try and tie their shoe? And I have a 3-year-old starting next Monday at home. His 3-year-old birthday is next Monday, so I'm really sad about that. But whenever we try and tie his shoes, he never sits still. So this is really a personal example for me that they never sit still. So can you imagine if you have these sensory declines and these challenges and the arthritis with the popsicle sticks and the gloves, for example, and you're trying to tie the shoe of a 3-year-old who won't sit still? So they get the yarn and they go to their neighbor, and the overall goal is for them to tie the yarn around their neighbor's wrist. So I always encourage the neighbors then to be that antsy 3-year-old. And this is where it really starts to get fun, because some people are just really wonderful 3-year-olds and they're waving their arms all over the place and it's terrible, but it's a lot of fun sort of introductory activity to get them involved in the program and start to realize how difficult things are once you have these sensory declines. So encourage them to be good 3-year-olds and wave their arms around and make it difficult on their partner. But it's a really fun activity to start with. And then the next thing that we'll do is break up into the activity stations. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the training here, there are 3 different activity stations. It's obviously ideal if you can do all 3, but this program is very flexible in that you are able to do 1 or 2 activity stations if you would like to. So the 3 activity stations, I'm just going to walk you through them. The first one, I'll go with the most simple one. The first one is Go Fish. So this is a station where they are going to play Go Fish. We have 2 sets of cards. So if they are a larger group, for example, if you have 30 people in your group, you can break them up into 5 and 5. So it's just easier to play Go Fish. In my experience with all of the programming I've done with this program so far, everyone knows how to play Go Fish, or at least there's several people who do, and they talk the rest of the people through it. So it's a very simple game, but this is simulating how these leisurely and social activities can become more difficult. And what I like to do in this station is go around and talk to them about what was it like to shuffle the cards. I can't tell you the number of times that a student has tried to shuffle the cards and the cards have gone all over the place, and because they have the arthritis fingers and they can't see very well, and then they're playing 52 pickup. So we have 10 minutes again. Shoot. Okay. So it's a really good experience for them to realize how social activities can become more difficult. So I'll ask them, you know, would you want to attend your weekly bridge club, for example, if you had these sensory challenges? Why would you want to go? Why would you not want to go? Is playing cards fun for you anymore? And that sort of thing. So it's a really good conversation to have with them as you're going throughout the room. The second station is Dose Your Daily Medications, and that is the medication station where they are given one pill box and 5 pill bottles with medication in them. And the medication is all beads.
But they said
so,
would you get on the phone and talk to Bobby, please?
I'm hearing someone talking, so you might want to mute.
Stamped this and wrote paid. I don't know. Talk to Bobby. She's in her office right now. Okay. Let me find her number.
Hey, Aaron, you can go under participants, and you, as the leader, can mute everybody's mic except yours.
Just a second. I didn't know.
Okay, I think it looks like everyone's muted. Okay, so the second station is to dose your daily medications, and this is where each person's going to get a pill box, and they're going to get 5 bottles of medication that have beads in them. They are all labeled with the dosing instructions. So for example, take 1 pill twice a day, take 2 pills once a day, whatever the dosing instruction is, and then the students or the participants are supposed to dose their medication for the week. So it is a 1-week dosing box with an AM and a PM side. So they go through and do that. I will mention here that we have 5 medication bottles available for them to go through. Some of my audiences have gotten through the 5 bottles very quickly, and other of my audiences have been a bit more slow. So if you have younger audiences, for example, or if you're not sure, ask your audiences to just do 3 of the bottles instead of 5, because part of the station is to dose the medication, and then they have to put it back in the bottles for the next group coming through the stations. So really be mindful of the time, and if they're taking longer, then tell them to go down to 3 bottles instead of 5. So that's that station. And the last station is called Say What. And this is a station where we're simulating hearing loss in a different way. So they're going to keep their earplugs in, and one person is going to be the aging listener. And recently, because they will have time to have more than one aging listener, with some of my audiences, particularly those students, I ask 2 people to volunteer to be the aging listeners so that once the first person goes, they're not sitting there trying to decide who the next aging listener is going to be. But that aging listener is going to put on the construction headphones with the radio function on. And the instructions on how to turn the radio on are there on the instructions sheet. So they will have the radio on, and this is where the whiteboards come into play. So each person in the group who's not the aging listener will write down a short sentence on the whiteboard. So this is really for them to experience what it's like to write with all of these sensory declines. It's not really necessary that they write the sentence for the purpose of the activity, but it's necessary for the purpose of them experiencing more or having the ability to experience more things, such as writing, when they have these sensory challenges. So they're not going to show anybody the sentence that they've written or anything like that. It's really just for them to experience what it's like to write. Then what they're going to do is one by one, they'll go through their group and they're going to read their sentence to the aging listener. And the aging listener is going to try and decipher what they've said. But there are specific instructions in that they're only supposed to read it twice, and they're supposed to read it in a normal speaking volume and a normal speaking tone, so that they're just speaking totally normally, and so then the aging listener can try and decide what they've said. This one gets really funny. A lot of my students have made really funny sentences or even some naughty sentences, and it becomes quite comical. There's also, in my experience, been a lot of sentences about cats. Either I don't like cats, or I love cats, or cats are dumb is another one that I've heard a lot. So you'll be surprised how many times you hear things about cats in this activity, but that's just a side note for humor. But yeah, so they do that, and they read their sentence to the aging listener. The aging listener tries to recite back what their sentence was, and then they pick a new person to be the aging listener, and they do it all again. But this is really to highlight what it's like to have hearing aids, because when you're in noisy environments, oftentimes hearing aids amplify background noise, and that's the purpose of the music. So if you are, for example, in a bowling alley, where there's a lot of music going on and the pins and the balls rolling and all of this noise, hearing aids are very good at picking up that background noise. But they're not so good when all of that background noise is happening at picking up a conversation that's occurring 5 feet in front of your face, for example. So this is really to simulate that that aspect of hearing aids and how it picks up all of that background noise. It's a really fun activity, and in my experience, the students or participants have a lot of fun with that and make it interesting. So those are our activity stations. And while this is going on, I encourage the facilitator or facilitators to walk around and talk to them. Talk to them about how they're feeling. Why does this feel different? How would you compensate if you had to deal with this all the time? Do you think you're going to take better care of yourself now to prevent these things from happening in the future? Just go around and have a conversation with students. Talk to them about shuffling the cards in the Go Fish station. Talk to them about, would it be difficult to dose your medication on a weekly basis? Do you think it would be easy for you to make a mistake when you're dosing that medication? How do you think it would be writing a card to your grandson when you have arthritis and you're unable to bend your fingers to grip the pen? There's so many different things that you can talk to them about during these activity stations, and I encourage you to do that. And that's one of the benefits, really, of having multiple facilitators, so that you're able to go around and make sure that everyone's on task and that each group knows what they're supposed to be doing, and then talking to them about it. And that really makes the whole program more beneficial. Okay. All right. So then at the end, and I think this is going to kick us off soon, and if it does, just go back to the same link as before. But at the end, I have discussion questions. So once we do the sensory or the activities, bring everyone back together as a group. And at this time, they can take their sensory gear off and they can start winding down to have a conversation about the whole experience. So I have several questions. The first of which is, do all older adults experience these types of decline? And this is perhaps the most important one, because we don't want to tell our participants that every older adult is just a complete invalid and that they can't see, they can't hear, they can't smell, they can't taste, they can't feel anything, because that's not the message that we want to get across. We want to get across that people experience these types of decline, but to different degrees, and they experience these things in different ways. So that's really the purpose of this question, is to have that conversation with them and talk to them how it's variable among individuals, which is really important, because we want them to develop empathy for older adults, but not to develop this ageist view that everyone is unable to do all of these things. So it's a very important question to talk about. And then we go into different questions like, how would your daily life be different if you had to live with these types of declines? And many of these things are already going to be talked about as you're going around and talking to the different groups. So you might have already heard these answers, but come back and talk as a full group and talk about how your life would be different, what things you would have to do differently, and how you would compensate for them. Talking about how you can better interact with